she'll be dead with you. While foreign affairs are screwing rotten, like morale has hit rock bottom.
Hi, welcome back to Topical Talk. I'm Jim Cirencione. I'm here with my co-host Rob DiLorenzo.
Hello, we're back.
We're going to be discussing tonight medical malpractice, medical and legal issues, and we have two very distinguished guests with us to discuss that, and I'm going to ask Rob to introduce them.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, here we have Justice Douglas McKeon.
Nice to be with you, Rob.
Okay, nice to have you. Thank you very much for coming to Topical Talk.
My pleasure.
And on my left, we have Jonathan C. Reiter, who's an attorney. Welcome.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming. Yes. Okay.
I'd like to throw the floor open first to Justice McKeon and let him give us a little background on what the issues today are in medical malpractice.
Correct.
Well, as you know, Jim, during this past legislative session, Governor Cuomo placed great emphasis on reducing Medicaid costs. Right. And one of the ways he sought to accomplish that was by changing our malpractice system in New York. A Medicaid redesign team had made some proposals for caps, for a fund to pay for the future medical expenses of neurologically damaged children, an expansion of a program that we had instituted in the Bronx, which is a mediation type approach to these malpractice cases.
All right.
And there were a litany of other things that have been on the table, all with the aim of reducing malpractice costs as part of reducing healthcare costs in the state.
Which is a good thing, which is a very...
Well, obviously, we need to do that in ways that still provide quality care for people.
Of course, okay.
But the malpractice issue has been, the subject of some controversy as to what it means by way of unnecessary tests.
Right.
And really costing the taxpayers significant sums of money by way of increased Medicaid expenditures.
Okay, understood. Right.
And how far have these programs gone? There are some that have been implemented, some being studied?
Well, you know that the cap issue was defeated in the legislature.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But a fund to deal with neurologically impaired children who were the victims of a mishap during the birthing process was passed. The courts are now beginning to implement that. It's a new statute. I would say about six or 7 weeks old.
Right.
And that's been a very, very significant point. And the belief is that it will significantly reduce Medicaid in the state.
Medicaid in the state, right.
Now, when you said cap, what does that mean?
Yeah, explain to
that was defeated,
the
but
viewers
what was that?
in Southern Westchester County what exactly that means, a cap.
Well, throughout the country, there's been a robust debate as to whether there should be a ceiling. In the case of New York, it was going to be $250,000 that one could receive for pain and suffering, assuming they were to receive a jury award. Mm-hmm. The thought being that these caps reduce judgments, the amount of judgments, and the theory being that it would reduce malpractice premiums.
The premiums.
Exactly.
Okay, right.
Now, there's been a debate about this subject nationwide.
Right. I've heard also the Washington administration talk about possible caps and things of that nature.
Well, I think the Obama administration has been quite interested in the area of malpractice.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the subjects that they're pushing, and it's a very interesting one, is the concept of health courts, which would take away from juries the dealing with malpractice claims.
How would they deal with the constitutional issues of trial by jury and things of that nature? Or would that have to be just tested?
Well, I think it would have to be tested. It's a somewhat new concept. It would basically provide for tribunals with judges with specialized training in medical issues, and these particular cases would be paid on a scheduled basis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thought being that if somebody is the victim of malpractice in Oswego County in the same fashion as someone in New York City, there should be a consistency as to the outcome,
Right.
where there is none now with a jury. of course. The flip side, as I'm sure Mr. Reiter would agree, there is a strong feeling that when all is said and done,
Right.
juries should be the final determiners of these particular cases, and there is where the debate lay.
Jonathan,
see.
can I ask you to weigh in on that issue of a cap and health courts and some of these possible reforms?
Okay. First of all, let me talk about the notion that this new fund that's created for infants, brain damaged infants, reduces Medicaid costs. This is, in my view, a complete falsehood, and I'll explain why. The problem with the infant cases is that the infants who get brain damaged have very large future medical needs for custodial care, for rehabilitative care, and so forth.
No, that's true. That is
Now,
very true.
in a case in which, for example, a person, the plaintiff, the child, was on Medicaid, for example.
Right.
A poor child lives in the Bronx. What would happen would be that up to a certain point, while the case was going on, Medicaid would pay for all these costs. And when the verdict or settlement came in, those costs would have to be assumed by the insurance company for the doctor or the hospital.
Right.
So that would then take the cost of the
And transfer it.
to the person's carrier, insurance carrier, who was responsible for causing the damage.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, now this does not, if you then take that cost, which may be millions of dollars,
Right.
and put it back on the public, which is what this does.
In a because it's a scheduled
No,
award
not because-
in
no,
a
because of
program.
Medicaid. Medicaid, you're saying?
I don't want to correct my friend, Mr. Reiter.
Okay.
It doesn't put it back on the public. It's funded by an assessment on hospitals, on their obstetrical revenues. And the one thing it really does do is reduce Medicaid. Because what we've had in the state of New York are the use of what are called supplemental needs trusts.
Okay.
In other words, it's a concept that was devised to allow people to remain on Medicaid and yet keep the portion of a judgment. And there's been use of these supplemental needs trusts in New York to the extent that cases are being settled, judgments are being entered with respect to these cases, and yet Medicaid is still on the hook to pay for these children as to their care. What the fund does, it substitutes its own fund for Medicaid, and so it does reduce Medicaid in New York at no expense onto the taxpayers beyond the startup money that was, I think, about $30 million.
So it's a form, excuse me, it's a form of regulation and control, because they saw quite a bit of funds
Yeah, in other words, they're
being used,
establishing a way of compensating these
compensating
injured
for
people,
these injured children, neurological
right,
involved.
apart from the standard litigation system with all its experts and expensive litigation, and then there's a fund established.
The reason for it was that there are certain hospitals, basically down here in the New York City area, who over the past number of years have had spiraling malpractice premiums because of these obstetrical claims.
Right, they see that as a problem.
They're
right,
located in venues where there have been huge verdicts
Knock
and
them out of
huge
business.
judgments, and their Medicaid reimbursement rate,
Right,
bearing in mind that in the Bronx, for instance, 70% of births are paid for by Medicaid.
okay.
The Medicaid reimbursement rate was inadequate to cover the cost of the malpractice premium and the overhead of the hospital. Montefiore Hospital being the
Didn't
example.
pay
You
for
mentioned
all of it. It
Montefiore
really
and
didn't
Westchester
pay for
County
all of it.
Medical, right?
Well, Westchester County
to the
Medical is
hospital.
somewhat different. They've been involved recently in a program, a mediation type program that started in the Bronx.
Right.
And it's really, I've heard gotten rave reviews. The people at Westchester Medical Center and the court system are doing a good job of here of reducing the time that it takes for someone to receive compensation or to get a real significant conversation about claims.
And
I
what
see.
about, Jonathan, the plaintiff's
Let me just say
point
this.
of view, plaintiff's bar?
Right,
The,
we'll let
the,
Jonathan.
the problem with this idea, in practice, if you're now saying that this fund is not going to be, there's no public money in this fund, that it's really going to be paid for as an assessment from hospitals,
Other than the $30 million to start it.
then the point is, what benefit did the hospitals get from this? In other words, they're now going to assume, according to this, the direct responsibility for funding all these millions of dollars, when before the malpractice carrier was responsible for doing so.
Well, you had five.
So in effect, there is something missing here. There's something counterintuitive and wrong.
The reality is this, Mr. Reiter, that there are 5 hospitals in the New York City area: Columbia Presbyterian, Montefiore, Maimonides, Beth Israel, which pay approximately 45% of premiums for hospitals in the state. And the reason for that is this obstetrical problem. Right. And so what was done, that particular risk was spread across the state onto other hospitals, what I don't want to use the term taxed, but they pay a portion of their revenues toward the creation of the fund, which consequently reduces this Medicaid cost as to these 5 hospitals, or urban-type hospitals, which have a greater frequency of delivering Medicaid babies as opposed to upstate. And so that's the concept of it.
And just for our viewers' edification,
Right.
this kind of came to a head in this area because of the nature of obstetrics. Does that produce a lot of claims? Is that the
Very expensive ones.
Very
Those are the most expensive ones.
Those are the most expensive out of all.
Specifically, the reason that I said before, because the infants have long life expectancies, and they require a great many medical and rehabilitative services.
So Jonathan, what's your response to the fact that these hospitals were seeming to be overwhelmed, and that this might be a solution maybe we could apply to other areas of medical malpractice?
This is a very specialized point, the obstetrical issue. And frankly, there is no way, in my view, that an assessment from upstate hospitals to fund the supposed liabilities of these 5 hospitals will ever be able to accomplish.
It's the liabilities across the state, but the principal beneficiaries are these hospitals
In other words,
down here.
they're evening it
Which
up.
is
Jonathan, if I,
but
I'm sorry to, okay,
But
I
the
don't want to
point is,
interrupt you, but I want to.
if you're taking the position that these upstate hospitals now have the financial wherewithal to fund these services for these children to the same level that the public does through Medicare, Medicaid, and other social programs, it's ludicrous, because you're then saying that these hospitals will be able to come up with the same level of services to the children. It's not possible. In fact, they cannot be, in any way, shape, or form, have the funds to do this.
You'll have to take that up with the governor, but there are built-in mechanisms into the statute where if 80% on an actuarial basis of the money is exhausted, a red flag goes up, and either the fund is suspended so that the youngsters who are in it continue to get services, or there has to be
a reimbursement of the fund.
another assessment. On some.
Do we all agree there's a
sort.
problem in this issue?
That's what I was going to ask
okay, right.
Jonathan next.
Jonathan,
is there a problem?
Is there a problem, and should it be left alone? And if there is a problem, if you don't think this is the proper solution, what do you feel then? If anything, what do you feel would be the solution for this problem?
The problem for the hospitals has been that the rate at which they are reimbursed for these services is too low. That is the problem,
So
and has
it
always
should
been
include
the
the
problem.
services and a premium for their malpractice and cover all expenses.
Well, plus,
And
there's,
that's the government.
Should be
there's
paid
also
more.
the fact. There's also the
viewers
fact
done this. Okay.
that the malpractice insurers have to make a profit. So there's a profit margin put forward as part of the premiums. They have to figure out, that they're going to pay out so much, they're going to take in so much premium, and they're going to make a profit.
And that's what actuarials basically do.
Well, that's what they do.
Right.
So I can understand that some way, shape, or form, the hospitals want to eliminate that profit, because that's the little piece, that's the vigorish in the system, is the profit of the carrier.
1% or 2%?
Mr. Reiter,
Yeah.
the problem is, in Montefiore, for instance, they are losing thousands of dollars every time they deliver a Medicaid baby.
Right.
Now, I think whether...
So how do you rectify that
Now, that has
problem?
nothing to do with malpractice.
Well,
that's my point.
No, listen, you may well be right. What I'm saying is, that's a fact of life. how that's addressed, and I think any well-meaning person, whatever their view on tort reform be, agrees that that should not happen, that a hospital shouldn't be penalized for delivering the babies of poor people.
Not at all.
And therefore, one of the ways that that has been, or at least hopefully will be ameliorated, is through the use of this fund. That's one of the principal reasons for its existence.
Okay. Let me respond to that. I think we're getting to the core of the problem right now, because the poor people who unfortunately are the victims of medical malpractice are being made the scapegoats for the problem, which is that Medicaid and Medicare are not reimbursing the hospitals and the physicians appropriately. That is the problem. And I have taken the view that it is not medical malpractice which causes health care costs to rise. It is medical malpractice lawsuits. It is the medical malpractice itself. Let me give you an example.
The medical malpractice itself.
Yeah, let me give you an example. Let's say somebody goes into a hospital and they're there for an ambulatory procedure, let's say a laparoscopic gallbladder removal.
Okay.
In the court, this is a procedure which the insurance company, let's say they have Empire Blue Cross, they are going to be paid, the doctor's going to be paid $1,500 for this procedure.
Okay.
The person goes in, they come home the same day.
Right.
And let's say in the course of that procedure, the doctor performs it negligently and punctures an organ such as the aorta or the bile duct or something like that.
God forbid,
the patient
but yeah,
gets peritonitis and is in the hospital for 8 weeks, may die. But let's say he's in the hospital for 8 weeks with an infection in his abdomen or her abdomen.
Right.
At the end of that time, there's a $350,000 hospital medical bill.
Right.
Now that healthcare insurer, who may have gotten $12,000 in premiums from that patient, has now paid $350,000 for that procedure, which should have cost $1,500. That $350,000 now has to be shared by all the other people in the pool with whatever rates the insurance company puts forward for the next year.
Right.
Now, this money has been spent. That raises the cost of health care insurance to everyone and the cost of health care. No medical malpractice case has ever been filed.
Has ever been filed. Right.
This has been spent. Now let's say that
So you're saying that's what raises up the premiums
That's
of
the
insurance?
point.
The premium, okay.
And the cost of medical care.
and the cost
Now,
of medical care.
Let's say now that the person files a medical malpractice case and they get a recovery. That $350,000 that Empire Blue Cross spent is not even part of the case. They cannot recover that, and Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield cannot even recover it from the insurance company for the doctor under present law, because the law was passed about a year ago saying that they can't get it back. See, in the old days, the insurance company, the healthcare insurer, could actually get that money back from the malpractice carrier. The malpractice carriers got together, and now that can't happen.
Well, as part of a recovery.
Am I right, Judge?
As part of a recovery.
Yeah,
As
they
part of
cannot get it
recovery.
back. So what happens is the healthcare insurer has now been stuck with the entire cost of the medical care for the malpractice. That has nothing to do with whether there's a suit brought or not brought. Totally irrelevant.
You know what I'd like to hear you address also?
So the point that I'm making to you, just to be
Yeah,
finished,
Right.
is that this whole notion that it's the medical malpractice case that drives up healthcare costs
Okay.
is a complete fallacy. It's the malpractice itself. And what has been shown in a recent study.
I think your point is
Go ahead, Your Honor.
it does not drive it up to the extent that some suggest that it does.
I don't think it drives it up at all.
I don't think there's any dispute that medical mistakes happen. And
Unfortunately, yeah.
we have reports to that, and most don't ever see a courtroom. That's the reality.
There are no
of
suits
it.
even brought.
Right.
Could it be
Three-quarters of the
possible-
medical mistakes nobody even sues about.
Could it be possible it's a collaboration of all these things that add up that actually cause, this drain, this rising the expense of healthcare?
That's too simplistic.
That's too simplistic.
Yeah,
Okay.
If you
I mean,
don't
again,
look,
for the viewers to
if you
okay.
don't look
That's
at what
true,
the
but
facts
it's not
are,
really saying anything.
It's
That
not
is
really.
true.
I'm generalizing. I understand.
People are living longer. We've made
Factors.
remarkable strides in the care and treatment that we can provide, and all of this stuff is costly.
Right.
The malpractice issue is certainly in there. I I don't believe it's the principal reason why we're seeing healthcare costs.
That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe it's not the sole reason.
No,
okay.
no,
It's
not
a,
at all.
It's a
little bit of everything.
It's the flea on the tail of the dog.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
entire malpractice payouts for all premiums, all compensation, all verdicts, and all judgments in the United States today is between 1 and 2% of the healthcare costs in the United States.
Oh,
that was according
1 to 2%.
1 to 2%. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office.
Now,
The United States
I did
government.
not know that.
I think the issue is this, Robert. I think some of the proponents of medical malpractice reform argue that doctors are performing unnecessary tests as a defensive medicine mechanism to avoid being sued because of the threat of malpractice.
I agree with that.
And
being a
that-
healthcare professional myself, I
And
agree
that's
with
a factor that they believe also is not reflected, and Jonathan quotes the numbers correctly. I think it's 2 or 3%,
Okay.
depending on the study. That's the component of it that, you know, it's hard to put a finger on
Right.
as to what its cost is.
A lot of physicians do practice in fear
Practice
of legal
defensively,
lawsuit.
yes.
Right, exactly right. Defensive medicine or defensive
Okay,
practice.
the Congressional Budget Office addressed this in its study and said as follows. CBO believes that savings from reducing, quote, defensive medicine would be very small. The notion that defensive medicine is something that there are all these unnecessary tests going on is a complete fallacy. If you look at case after case after case, you will see that the cost of the tests are a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall medical costs. And what's more, the benefits that are reaped from performing diagnostic tests,
Right.
where you find a cancer or you find a condition early on,
Right.
and are able to cure it, everybody knows that the huge amounts that are spent in healthcare are spent in the last year of a patient's life who's dying. Everybody knows this. It's the people who are the medical failures that cost all the money, because modern medicine keeps people alive in their terminal or pre-terminal year or year and a half,
Right.
at costs of millions of dollars.
What do you mean telling
If
me
you
when
are
my doctor
able-
sends me for this test, that test, and I got to see the eye doctor, and I got to see the stress test, that's all legit? I sometimes feel like I'm being maneuvered around here as an insured person.
Look, I can't comment
like
on your specific
my
doctor, but I
former
will
doctor.
say
Yeah,
that
no, right,
as
but-
an
but Jonathan's-
epidemiological issue, it's been examined 6 ways from Sunday.
Really?
So you're
And the
saying-
idea
I'm sorry,
is
yeah.
that the overall benefits
Right.
of preventive, I mean,
Outweigh.
an
Preventative
ounce of
medicine-
prevention is worth a pound of cure. Everybody knows that. And it's not even a pound in this area. It's a ton.
Okay, so just to clarify, to recap for the viewers, what we're saying is that early detection or early prevention and diagnostic tests actually don't cost a lot of money. Actually, it's preventing additional cost in later years of life if it does go unnoticed for patients. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. You have a situation, somebody comes into a hospital with a head injury.
Right.
They do an MRI or a CT of
see
the
a CAT
person's
scan
head,
or an
and they
MRI,
see a
right.
bleed in the brain, a small bleed.
Right.
If that patient is let out in to go home without that test,
Right.
that patient may become a comatose patient who requires lifelong care.
Lifelong care,
Now
correct.
that's $50 million you're talking about.
Right. So diagnostic testing and prevention is a good thing.
We got a couple of minutes
I
left.
think the issue is this.
Yeah.
To what extent, and this is where the debate occurs, to what extent are, quote, malpractice costs, the claim of additional testing for defensive medicine, the cost of defending these cases, the payouts in these cases, the premiums that hospitals and doctors are paying, to what extent does that impact not only on the quality of medical care, but the cost of it? And it's, you know, it's a very interesting debate.
Well, let me add something to the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center did a study, which I have here,
Right.
in which they decided to implement to have a consultant come in from their own insurance company and implement in the obstetrical department
Obstetrical.
6 specific recommendations, all of which had to do with charting, with better communication between
Prevent
the nurses
mistakes.
and doctors,
Right.
and so forth. And what they found was that over the 5 years that they implemented these things, their malpractice payouts went from $50 million in the first year, 2003, to $200,000 in 2009. That they were able, with these 6 recommendations, to basically eliminate virtually every malpractice claim that they were getting.
Well, I think Mr. Reiter's point, and it's one that is part of this discussion, is the issue of increased vigilance as to patient safety. And when we discuss these particular ideas of how to reduce malpractice costs, thankfully, part of that discussion focuses on hospitals and the profession being more vigilant insofar as being keenly aware that patient safety not only is a good thing for patients,
Absolutely.
it also reduces malpractice costs
Absolutely.
and liabilities down the line.
Being a healthcare professional correct, very, very well said. For 10 years, and when I first started out, I noticed working in hospitals that, writing up prescriptions or doctor's orders that are written to nurses in the hospital and notes that nurses do. Handwriting, I always said, you can't even read half of these things. And I'm embarrassed to say, being a healthcare professional, and I always said we should go computerized where you can at least read. And that's, I feel, a lot of the mistakes that occurred was because you couldn't even read the writing that was given by physicians.
They have these
but now
programs.
Now things, and Hillary Clinton was pushing for this years ago. Now most hospitals and doctors' offices are becoming computerized, which I think is a great thing.
I think the interesting issue,
which again helps to reduce the problems that occur
and Jonathan
patient safety for
Jonathan
patients.
and I spoke about it before while we were waiting to go on, and we don't have enough time to really do justice to, is this whole concept of what is a standard of care.
Right, good point.
And what will we look at in the future as far as what doctors are expected to do for us and what they need not do for us. And as we focus in on costs, I suspect that the standard of care that will be utilized to judge whether a doctor acted in accordance with good and accepted practice will probably vary. And that could take up a show just in and of itself.
I was going to say, great topic for the next time we have our guests on.
For the next topic,
just so we're clear, the standard of care is the standard by which a doctor is judged in a legal case.
That is correct.
The doctor is actually judged by the standard of care in that community at the time he or she gave that treatment. And as we get the medical advances, I guess, and science advance, that will definitely change.
Right, correct.
I'd like to thank our guest. This was one of the most interesting programs we've had.
No, this was fabulous, yes.
Chief Administrative Judge of the Bronx, Douglas McKeon, and also Jonathan Reiter, plaintiff's attorney.
And we thank you so much.
Jonathan, where is your office?
The Empire State Building.
Empire State Building, and your phone number is?
My phone number is 212-736-0979.
What kind of cases do you actually handle mainly?
We have a large medical malpractice plaintiff's practice. I also handle aviation disasters. We had many cases arising from the Flight 587 that crashed in
Bell Harbor.
Yes. We had about 16 cases there.
That was where the tail wing flew off and crashed in Queens.
We have one of the cases in the Buffalo crash, a very unfortunate case.
The icing case.
We lecture together quite frequently.
Oh, well,
we're an act we're going to take on to the road.
Thank you so much for coming.
But thank you so much for both of you
I hope
gentlemen.
you'll come back again and
Thank
talk
you.
a little bit about the standard of care and some of the other issues.
Absolutely,
Thank
yes,
you so much.
definitely.
Take care. Signing off on Topical Talk. We'll see you again next week.
And thanks for tuning in. We love you.